Hey, what's up guys? Joker here. Today we are going to be answering the question, can you game without a graphics card? Of course the answer to that is yes, you technically can game without a graphics card as long as you've got integrated graphics on your CPU, or if you happen to be running something like an AMD APU in before Raven Ridge comes out soon. Hopefully we'll be benchmarking that at some point in the future. But today, we're going to be focusing on Intel integrated graphics, specifically their 530 graphics on my i5 6600K, which I do keep overclocked, a modest overclock of 4.7 gigahertz, along with 8 gigabytes of RAM, in a system build that you guys have seen featured here previously on the channel. I had used this build when I went to PAX East earlier this year, and then I kind of updated it and gave it to my girlfriend earlier this year for her birthday back in August, which you guys enjoyed that video very much. So I wanted to go ahead and benchmark this system just using integrated graphics, because since that time I have pulled out the graphics card. Sometimes the GPU's in there, sometimes it's not in there, because I'm always needing the 1060 to kind of test up here in the studio because I only have one of them. So I wanted to see, you know, what it would be like to game with just integrated graphics, because I had pulled the GTX 1060 out of there the other day when I was benchmarking on Destiny 2 and Wolfenstein 2: The New Colossus. And later that evening, I had noticed that my girlfriend's son was actually still playing games. Like, he was playing Team Fortress 2, as well as South Park 2, The Fractured Butthole. So I was like, oh, he's gaming on integrated graphics. And then he had noticed later on, he was like, there's no graphics card in there. And I'm just like, yeah, you're right. He's been increasingly playing on that system quite a bit. So I try to keep the 1060 down there as much as I can, because he's slowly joining the PC master race. I've been converting him one day at a time, and so far he's doing pretty well with it. He likes to play most games that are coming out on the PC, mostly because I pretty much have every game that comes out, so it's just easy, free access pretty much for him. Doesn't need to worry about bugging his mom or me or anything to pick him up a game, so he's been increasingly playing on the PC downstairs quite a bit, which is awesome. Always nice to have a new member of the PC master race. Maybe one day in the future, we'll even get him his own system. That would be really good to do here on the channel. But as I mentioned, I benchmarked on the i5 6600K across a few games, about 6 or 7 games, ones that I thought would kind of fit into, you know, maybe titles that someone would want to play if they needed to play on Intel integrated graphics for a variety of reasons. Maybe they just can't afford a graphics card and they want to play games on the PC with their friends, or, you know, maybe PC-specific titles. I mean, in most cases, you would probably want to get a dedicated graphics card. I would never advise anyone to go out and specifically build a system to play on dedicated graphics unless you know for a fact, like, you're only going to play like 1 or 2 games, and you know those games run really well, and you're okay with, you know, taking the hit as far as resolution and graphics settings are concerned. Or you could be in the situation of maybe you've been parting together a build for a while and you're waiting for GPUs to come down in price, because we know that's a thing right now, and you want to just game temporarily on dedicated graphics. That happened to me back in 2013. I was building up a system and I was getting the parts one at a time. I had started in like December and I didn't finish the build until like May. But like I bought like the case and the power supply, then I bought the motherboard, then I bought the CPU, then I bought the RAM. And at one point, I pretty much had everything I needed besides a graphics card, which ended up being the GTX 680 like 2 months later. And I also didn't have a monitor at the time. So I ended up gaming on my 3570K and using the dedicated graphics for the desktop and stuff like that. And I was playing on a television just using the 3570K at 720p. And I was able to play some games. Like, there were certain games I was able to play. I remember playing, I think it was Black Ops 1 or 2 at the time. I'm not sure which year 2 came out, but it was whatever the most recent Black Ops game was. I was able to play like Nazi zombies on that, and I was able to have a decent enough time. It was enough to get me through it, waiting until I got my GTX 680 back in 2013. So there are a lot of reasons why someone might want to be interested in gaming on Intel graphics. You know, there are so many variety of reasons out there. If you ever had to game on Intel graphics, then let me know down in the comments below. But yeah, I went through and I started benchmarking these games, and I wasn't targeting a specific set of settings or resolution. I was pretty much targeting 60 frames per second. That's what I wanted to achieve. I wanted to get 60 frames per second, and I didn't want to go below 720p, because I thought that was basically my bottom line, was 720p. I did not want to go below that point. So I went through and I started testing these games and messing with the settings a little bit. So you'll be seeing that in the graphs in a little bit with the settings that I used and everything. And for the most part, in the games that I tested, I was able to play it very well on a variety, some games at 720p, some games even at 1080p, other games not so well, like PlayerUnknown's Battlegrounds. That ran absolutely awful. Like, no matter what I did to that game, even if I played it at 720p and set the resolution scale slider all the way to the lowest, which looked horrendous. Like, the graphics were like the worst thing I've ever seen in my life at that particular resolution and set of settings. And even then, it was still struggling between like 20 and 30 FPS, and it was just not an enjoyable experience by any means. So if you're in the unfortunate situation where you're having to game on just Intel dedicated graphics, I would say something like PlayerUnknown's Battlegrounds or Rust, or sort of like open world games like that, is probably not going to give you the most ideal experience. But those were kind of the outliers to the rest of the games that I tested here, because other games like Overwatch, Counter-Strike Go, Team Fortress 2, which are all first-person shooters where you would really want 60 FPS ideally. I mean, in those games, you're going to want 60 FPS like pretty much solid all of the time. Otherwise, at that point, you may as well be gaming on a console, although then you're kind of getting into having the game with a controller, which is never going to be a good thing for a first-person shooter. So, I mean, even if you had to drop below 60 a little bit, you'd still be better off on the PC, I feel, playing with a mouse and keyboard. But surprisingly, in those games, I was able to get very smooth performance, obviously varying a bit. On Overwatch, I was testing at 720p on low, and depending on the map I was on, there were a couple maps like Hanamura, I would kind of see it dip down a little bit below 60, but for the most part, it was up above 60 FPS all the time. And it was a perfectly playable gaming experience. I didn't have any issues with it. I mean, no, I wasn't playing at my standard resolution, which is ultra wide on a 1080 Ti and all of that stuff with all the graphics options and everything increased to the max. But if I was put into a situation where my options were to either A, not game, or B, be able to game, or maybe possibly game with friends on the PC where I don't have that on a console, then it would certainly be a playable experience. Obviously not ideal for probably most enthusiasts out there, but you can still do it. Something like Heroes of the Storm ran absolutely perfect, and in a game like that, you're not going to really have to worry about dropping below 60 FPS as much as something like, say, Overwatch or CSGO or TF2, because, you know, you're not really required to have that, you know, split second reaction time and trying to pop headshots and things. And it's something like Heroes of the Storm, it wasn't an issue anyway. I mean, I was playing that at 720p on medium, and it was well over 60 frames per second. Rocket League was another game where you don't necessarily need a solid 60, but it's always nice. But that game ran extremely well, too. It was getting around 60 FPS almost all of the time. And in that particular game, I happened to be playing at 1080p on medium. So I didn't even need to drop that down to 720p, which I think 1080p at medium is probably going to be even better than what you'd be able to get on a console and be able to get 60 frames per second in that particular title. And then other games like CSGO and Team Fortress 2, 60 FPS is not going to be an issue at all, even at 1080p playing on medium settings. So all of those games, besides PlayerUnknown's Battlegrounds and Rust, ran really well at the settings that I was able to utilize for my testing. So let's go into the graphs now. We'll take a look at the average FPS and the 1% low. And as you can see there, PUBG and Rust are way at the bottom, like way, way, way at the bottom. You're getting to the point of pretty much unplayable. I mean, it wouldn't be impossible, because I mean, I was running around in PUBG. I ended up getting like 3 kills, so it wasn't impossible, but it's not ideal. I mean, if that's the only way you can possibly play the game, and you know, you could still get on there with a couple of friends, you might be able to have a good time. But you'd really want to look at getting a graphics card at that point, I feel. For like Overwatch, Heroes of the Storm, both averages over 60 frames per second, and then Rocket League, CSGO, and Team Fortress 2 doing very well on those last 3 games, all at 1080p at medium settings. So that's really awesome to see that all of those games were able to run at native 1080p on the monitor that I was using at medium settings. So they all ran extremely well. So if you are in the situation where you need to be gaming on Intel graphics for maybe a temporary period of time, even for a few months, there are certainly games out there that will allow you to do that, and you'll be able to at least play some games, which is always great. But you would probably want to look at least getting a graphics card at some point in the future. If you're on like a super duper budget, you could look at something like the GTX 1050 or the RX 560. I'd probably lean toward the GTX 1050 In that particular matchup, if you have a little bit more money, you're probably looking at the 1050 Ti around $160. So you've got a couple options in there. It's sub $200, which would definitely give you a big boost in performance and, you know, make games like PlayerUnknown's Battlegrounds, like that would become playable. You'd probably even be able to, on something like a GTX 1050, you'd probably be able to play that at 1080p. Granted, you wouldn't be maxed out, but you should be able to get up around 60 frames per second depending on what settings you are using in that game. So honestly, I was impressed with the Intel graphics. I think it did a lot better than what I thought it would going into this. So really great to see that the integrated graphics can actually hold up to some games here in 2017. And yeah, let me know what you thought about this testing down in the comments below. If you guys enjoyed this video, then you know what to do. Leave a like on it and subscribe if you're not already. And if you want to support this channel and get some of the best games here in 2017 and save yourself a few bucks, you can always consider using my affiliate link over to cdkeys.com in the description below, where you can get Wolfenstein 2 right now for $35. So definitely be sure to hit that up if you still have not picked up Wolfenstein 2, which is a fantastic game. And I'm going to go ahead and get on out of here, guys. I will catch you in the next video. Ta-ra.